February 1967. Quang Tri Province, Vietnam. Somewhere in the jungle north of the demilitarized zone, a North Vietnamese general whose name American intelligence had been trying to confirm for months was moving between positions with the careful security that a man with enemies learns to maintain. He traveled with bodyguards. He changed routes. He moved at irregular hours. He had survived the war this far by treating every moment outside a bunker as potentially his last. He was right to be careful. He just was not careful enough. 1,100 meters away, hidden in vegetation so dense that a man standing 5 feet from his position would not have seen him, Staff Sergeant Carlos Hathcock II had been lying motionless for 3 days. He had crawled to his position over the course of an entire night, moving inches at a time across open ground that the general's security detail watched continuously, timing his movement to the guard's patrol patterns, controlling his breathing, controlling his heartbeat, doing everything that his years of training and his particular genius for this specific form of warfare had taught him was necessary to get close enough to do what he had come to do. He had not eaten in 3 days. He had not stood up in 3 days. He had urinated where he lay rather than risk the movement that standing would require. He had endured insects and heat and the particular physical suffering of complete immobility that most human beings cannot sustain for more than hours. Hathcock could sustain it for days. He had done it before. He would do it again. Suffering was irrelevant when there was a mission. The general appeared in his scope at 7:43 in the morning. Hathcock calculated the distance, the wind, the angle, the drop of the .30 caliber bullet over 1,100 meters of humid Vietnamese air. He controlled his breathing. He controlled his heartbeat. He squeezed the trigger with the slow, steady pressure that turns a shot into something almost mechanical, something that happens between heartbeats when the body is perfectly still and the mind is perfectly calm. The general fell. Hathcock began the 36-hour crawl back to American lines. The story of Carlos Hathcock is the story of the most lethal sniper in American military history, a man from rural Arkansas who had been shooting since he was old enough to hold a rifle and who brought to the jungles of Vietnam a combination of patience, skill, and absolute calm under pressure that his enemies came to fear the way soldiers fear death itself. The North Vietnamese Army placed a bounty of $30,000 on his head, an extraordinary sum that reflected both the practical damage he was doing to their operations and the psychological impact of a single American sniper who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. They sent their own snipers to kill him. He killed them first. Carlos Hathcock grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, in circumstances that were difficult in the specific ways that rural Southern poverty in the 1950s was difficult. His parents' marriage collapsed when he was young, and he was raised primarily by his grandmother. The rifle that he found in his grandmother's closet when he was 8 years old became the center of his life in the way that a gifted child's defining talent always becomes central, not through formal instruction or institutional encouragement, but through the organic process of a person discovering what they are exceptionally good at and pursuing it with everything they have. He hunted to supplement the family's food supply. He shot competitively whenever he could find competitions to enter. He read everything available about ballistics and wind and the physics of a bullet's flight through air. By the time he enlisted in the Marine Corps at 17, he was already a better shot than most men who had been shooting for decades. The Marine Corps, which had a tradition of competitive marksmanship that went back to the Civil War, recognized immediately what it had acquired. Hathcock won the Wimbledon Cup, the premier long-range rifle competition in the United States, in 1965. He shot against the best competitive marksmen in the country and won with a performance that the shooting community discussed for years. He was 23 years old. 6 months later, he was in Vietnam. The war that Hathcock arrived in was not the war that American military doctrine had prepared for. Vietnam was not a conventional conflict with defined front lines and identifiable enemy formations. It was a war of ambush and counter-ambush, of villages that were friendly by day and hostile by night, of an enemy that dissolved into the population and the jungle when direct confrontation was disadvantageous and materialized with lethal effect when the conditions suited them. American firepower and mobility advantages that had defined victory in previous wars were constrained by rules of engagement, political considerations, and the specific geography of the Vietnamese jungle in ways that made the war frustrating in ways that military professionals had not fully anticipated. In this environment, the sniper was not a specialist performing a peripheral function. He was a force multiplier of the first order, capable of achieving results that required company-sized conventional operations to replicate, operating at a fraction of the cost in men and material. A single sniper who could deny an enemy commander freedom of movement, who could make the act of standing in the open carrying a rifle a potentially fatal decision, changed the tactical calculus of every operation in his area of responsibility. Hathcock changed the tactical calculus of every operation in Quang Tri Province. His confirmed kill total was 93, the official number that Marine Corps records supported with the verification standards required for confirmation. His actual kill total was almost certainly far higher. The confirmed number required witnesses or physical evidence, standards that a sniper operating alone or in two-man teams in jungle terrain often could not satisfy regardless of the actual outcome of an engagement. Hathcock himself estimated his unconfirmed kills at well over 300, a number that his fellow Marines and his commanding officers considered plausible based on what they had observed of his operational tempo. The missions that defined his reputation were not the accumulation of individual kills, remarkable as that accumulation was. They were the specific operations that required capabilities beyond marksmanship, the operations that combined the shooting skill with the patience and the physical endurance and the tactical intelligence that separated a great sniper from a merely excellent one. The crawl across the open field to reach a position from which he could kill a North Vietnamese general was his most celebrated mission, but it was not his most difficult. His most difficult was the mission that came to be known among Marine snipers as the Apache. A North Vietnamese sniper who had been killing American Marines with a consistency and a skill that suggested professional training had been operating in the area for weeks. The Marine Command wanted her eliminated. She was good enough at her trade that sending conventional forces after her was likely to result in casualties without a resolution. Hathcock volunteered. What followed was a hunt in the most literal sense, two trained killers moving through the same jungle, each aware that the other was there, each using every skill and every instinct developed through years of this specific work to find the other before being found. Hathcock moved through terrain that he assessed as the most likely sniper positions, not looking for the sniper directly but looking for the indicators of a person who was also not moving directly, who was also trying not to be seen, who was also using the terrain in the ways that a trained sniper uses terrain. He saw the glint of her scope first. It was a fraction of a second of reflected light in the vegetation 200 meters away, the kind of detail that most people would not notice and that Hathcock registered as immediately as a sound in the darkness. He fired in the same motion that he identified the target, a reflex so practiced that the distance between perception and action was almost zero. The bullet went through her scope and into her eye. He had fired directly into her scope at the moment she was looking through it at him. The ballistic geometry of the shot meant that if she had fired a half-second earlier, the bullet from her rifle would have hit him. The fact that he was alive and she was not was a margin measured in fractions of a second. Hathcock picked up her rifle and carried it back to base as evidence of the kill. It was a standard Soviet Mosin-Nagant sniper rifle with a PU scope. The scope had a bullet hole through the center of the objective lens. The North Vietnamese response to Hathcock's effectiveness was a measure of the respect and the fear that he had generated in the enemy command. The $30,000 bounty on his head was accompanied by the deployment of a team of North Vietnamese snipers whose specific mission was to find and kill him. The team was led by a sniper whose skill had been demonstrated against other targets, a man who had been trained in the Soviet Union and who was considered the best the North Vietnamese Army had available for this specific purpose. Hathcock killed him. The engagement was brief and one-sided in the way that engagements between the very best and the merely excellent tend to be one-sided, which is to say that the outcome was not certain until it was over and then it was completely certain. Hathcock had identified signs of a skilled tracker moving through terrain in a pattern that suggested purpose rather than transit, had set up a position that gave him the shot he needed when the other sniper appeared, and had fired before the other sniper could identify his position. He was not unaffected by these killings. The mythology of the sniper in popular culture tends toward the emotionally detached professional who views his work as purely technical, a matter of ballistics and patience without the moral weight that killing carries in other contexts. Hathcock was not that person. He spoke in interviews and in the memoir that was compiled from conversations with him about the psychological burden of his work, the faces that stayed with him, the specific memories of specific moments that did not fade with time. He differentiated between the kills that were straightforward in their moral clarity, the enemy soldiers who would have killed his fellow Marines if he had not killed them first, and the kills that carried more weight, the targets that he had been sent to eliminate for strategic reasons that were more abstract than the immediate protection of men he could see. He never suggested that what he did was wrong. He was a Marine who had been given a mission and had executed it with the skills God and training had given him. But he was also honest about the cost that this specific form of warfare extracts from the men who practice it, the cost of extended time alone in hostile territory, of seeing the enemy in the intimate detail that a telescopic sight provides, of carrying the weight of a skill that is measured in bodies. The mission that nearly ended his life came on September 16, 1969. Hathcock was riding in an amphibious tractor near the coast of Quang Tri Province when the vehicle rolled over a large antitank mine. The explosion destroyed the tractor and killed several Marines. Hathcock, who was on fire from burning fuel, pulled 7 wounded Marines from the burning vehicle before collapsing. The burns covered more than 40% of his body. He was evacuated to the United States for treatment that would last months and leave him with scars that remained visible for the rest of his life. He was recommended for the Medal of Honor for pulling the wounded Marines from the burning vehicle. The recommendation was downgraded to the Silver Star, a decision that his fellow Marines and his commanding officers considered inexplicable and unjust. He received the Silver Star. He accepted it with the dignity that his character demanded and said nothing publicly about the decoration he had not received. The physical consequences of the burns and subsequent health issues, including the multiple sclerosis that was diagnosed in 1975, ended his operational career. He spent his remaining years in the Marine Corps as a marksmanship instructor, passing to the next generation the skills and the philosophy that had made him what he was. The philosophy was simple, and Hathcock articulated it with the directness of a man who had spent years in situations where clarity was a survival requirement. You have to love the Marine to his left and to his right of you more than you love yourself. That's what makes a warrior. Not the killing. The love. The killing, in Hathcock's view, was the means. The end was always the same, bringing his fellow Marines home, denying the enemy the freedom of movement and the command presence that would cost American lives, doing the specific job that he was uniquely qualified to do in service of men who needed him to do it. Carlos Hathcock was medically retired from the Marine Corps in 1979. He spent his remaining years in Virginia Beach, Virginia, struggling with the progressive neurological damage of multiple sclerosis and maintaining his connection to the Marine Corps community through his teaching and his presence at marksmanship events. He died on February 23, 1999, at the age of 56. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico, Virginia, which trains the snipers who carry on the tradition that Hathcock helped define, hangs his photograph in a place of honor. The white feather that he wore in his bush hat as a deliberate provocation to the enemy who had put a price on his head, a declaration that he was there and they could come and find him if they were capable of it, became the symbol of Marine Corps snipers and is worn by Scout Sniper School graduates to this day. The North Vietnamese soldiers who hunted him in the jungles of Quang Tri Province called him Long Trang. White feather. They spent years trying to find him. They sent their best people after him. They offered a reward that represented more money than most Vietnamese families would see in a lifetime. They never collected it. Carlos Hathcock came home. He always came home. 93 confirmed times and more than 300 times that could not be confirmed. He went into the jungle alone and came back alone, and the men he had been sent to find did not come back with him. That is what a warrior looks like. Not in the movies, where the killing is clean and the hero is unmarked. In reality, where the killing leaves marks that do not fade and the warrior carries them without complaint because the men to his left and to his right needed him to go into the jungle and the men to his left and to his right were worth any price. Hathcock paid the price. All of it. Without hesitation and without complaint. The white feather is still worn. His name is still spoken. In the community of men who do what he did, in the quiet professional world of the military sniper, his name means what it has always meant since the jungles of Quang Tri Province. The best. The standard. The one against whom all others are measured. White feather.